VenomousStare returns with another edition of the Gregathon, the series in which I take a look at every single match IdrA Fields ever played in the GSL. This is my favorite tournament ever, and my favorite player ever, and an incredible masterclass that everybody should love to watch, because this is a monumental moment in StarCraft II history, where one of the biggest players in the history of the game did his best to try to win the biggest tournament in the game's history, all the while attempting to defy incredible imbalance. IdrA's facing off against the coach of OGS. OGS was an incredibly powerful organization back in this time, and this was a team that had players like Marine King on it, and they were considered very powerful. And coaches of pro gamer organizations are almost always ex-players, so that's the case here. This guy was an old school Brood War pro gamer, and Artosis has played against this guy right before this series and said that he was an aggressive player. This guy plays Terran. Another funny thing said before this series, Artosis referred to IdrA as his illegitimate son, which is pretty fucking amazing. And we can jump right into the game here because it's going to be on Jungle Basin. Jungle Basin is a very rush-centric map. I've casted games on this before. IdrA referred to this map as stylistically perfect for Genro because this is a total Terran map, and it has a pocket base, aka an inside expansion. And a lot of newbies might think, well, since Zerg always wants to fast expand, doesn't a pocket base mean that it's good for Zerg? Well, no, not necessarily, because look where the third base is. Third base is virtually untakeable. You have a third base in the middle, right by two towers, and right by where Terran wants to take their third. God forbid if Terran makes a PF and makes a couple tanks, you're pretty much never going to be able to hold that. So then you're stuck with either one of the side bases, and in general this is a very chodish, claustrophobic map that lends itself to tight, aggressive play. Terran player moving out here with an early scouting SCV, and considering both third bases are virtually unattainable for Zerg, we could see a block here. And we do. eBay block coming down here for the Terran, and IdrA is bringing two drones because the last thing you want is for the Terran player to be able to get that beast at 95% health, and then you're almost in a position where you have to go freaking pool first. And on this map, that's the last thing you want to do. Remember, this game is Season 2 of the GSL. Second ever season. When we're talking The Simpsons here, this is Season 2. With the Thanksgiving episode and Blood Feud. This is old school, like Richie Aprile, 2010 era. Wings of Liberty had just come out. So when I say, oh, there's a pocket base, there's pretty much not an attainable third base on the whole map. Because the theme of the maps in this early era were they were extremely rush-centric, small, claustrophobic, natural, easily broken. They favored Terran. And if you were Zerg and you were playing against Protoss, well, they favored Protoss too. Because Zerg wants these big, open, rangy, safe maps where they can see attacks coming and they have time to make stuff to defend. And what do we see with these maps? Not that at all. Pretty much with a lot of these maps, the player could attack the Zerg, and then before Zerg could even have a chance to make a swell of lings, they would be at the front door. Shakura's Plateau was the best Zerg map in the pool at the time, and was the map that got vetoed in this series by the Terran player, the old school Brood War pro gamer. So if you don't understand Shakura's Plateau or the import of that statement, the great thing about StarCraft 2 is you can just hit the custom tab, type in Shakura's Plateau, and then play against your friend on it to really feel what it was like. So the player Gone tried to block the early natural because if we look at a lot of maps now, as a little marine push-out comes, if someone blocks your natural, you can very easily just go take your third, but not in this time. The third was awful, remember. And a tumor is going to successfully come down, and the Terran player came out, tried to snipe an Ovi, and IdrA thankfully had about 6 lings right before ling speed finished. And a crux of this matchup that you really have to remember when you watch these old school games is the queen was a joke. The queen had 3 range versus ground, which was just abominable. And it was even worse versus air, and creep spread was a little bit worse because of the UI and the way that it spread. So in general, the queen was worse in every regard. This meant that despite the fact that the rush maps were, or the map pool was very close and rush centric, queens, which are the backbone, the safe backbone of the defensive macro Zerg, were worse. Now we notice the player Terran, OGS Gone, you can definitely tell he's an old school Brood War pro gamer because he does some sort of Brood War maneuvers in this game. The cutesy little marine push out, the falling back to the third and not inside of his base. It might look like to the untrained eye that he's just playing sort of bad. The rap that these early games get, especially from new players who have no idea what they're talking about, is that the people who were playing them just were clueless and made a lot of unforced errors. This isn't really true. The players were worse at the time, and StarCraft players have been consistently improving the entire way through, and these games are certainly lower level, but they did have ideas. They weren't just doing random bullshit, all of them, especially in the GSL, the highest level Korean tournament. So we see a very interesting tactic here. The Terran player Gone knows that IdrA loves his Mutaling Baneling style, is pretty much going to go into 2-base Muta on this map because the third is virtually unattainable. If you don't know, between the natural and the third base that IdrA's taken, there are rocks, so that's way less defendable than you would think. And it's a very severe choke point, very chodish, very tight. It's not what you want to deal with Mutaling Baneling, where all your shit can get tank and Thor splashed, and you can't really run around your opponent. Spire's about to finish for IdrA, and the Terran player intelligently has set up a little bunker defensive location at the third where he knows IdrA wants to take his third. Now the reason this is good is because if you're going to go for a 2-base Muta strat and you're a Terran player and you know your opponent is going to want to make a big swell of Mutas before they take their third, they're going to make their Mutas, have them finish, run across map, and then when you're distracted by the Mutas and defending, that's when they'll just nakedly take their third. And we can see IdrA very diligently is running around the base, grabbing tower control, grabbing the third bases. Whenever IdrA played in GSL and in big tournament games, he was always way more diligent about grabbing tower control and doing things like creep dropping overlord bases. And here we can see right as his mutas finish, as I said, he's going to try to take a third and it's going to be blocked. Now he's going to have to make a swell of lings to break that, and he's going to run in, try to break the turrets. And what's funny about these games of the very first year that StarCraft 2 was out is the ZVTs and some other elements of other matchups play like a Brood War game. And what do I mean by that? I mean that if we look at the way that IdrA is playing, this looks just like a freaking Brood War TVZ, where the Zerg player gets out mutas and that's how he takes his third. And if you just have seen a lot of the game, you'll note that the harassment looks way more like Brood War Muta harassment than it does, say, Muta harassment now, or even Muta harassment in late 2012. The way that IdrA's trying to stack up his mutas between each shot. This was the standard practice in Brood War, where you would hotkey one overlord into the control group, and you could basically stack the mutas on top of one another. Now, famously, this never worked in StarCraft 2, and was a big point of contention with Zerg players, where they were very upset about that, because it was a huge nerf to the muta. And that's because if air units are all stacked on top one of another, yeah, they're more vulnerable to splash. But if you attack pre-splash, they can't be focus fired. And we would see the strategy 2-base Mutalisk versus Terran in Brood War. And cheesy Zerg players could just kill Terran straight up off of it because it hits before Terran can get their real splash, their Science Festival Radiate, or in this case, Thor's Splash. And here we see IdrA has finally broken the Terran player. And the Terran player had his tanks on hold position there so they didn't wander off. And IdrA found them and decimated them. Remember, there's no mine at this time, and you're really relying on the Thor to get the job done. So if your armory is late, you're in a bad way. So IdrA went straight up into 2-base Muta to get map control. Then he took his third, which was in an awful, virtually undefendable location. He also took the fourth at the same time to be cute. As you can hear, I'm still recovering from that vicious cold I had, almost certainly COVID, but I'm just going to call it a cold. And IdrA snipes the gas and gets out of there and is just continuing to get map control. And you notice the command that he used there was an attack command with the shift move command, meaning once he killed that building turret, his mutas would run away. This is a big way that multitasking Mutalisk players were able to harass and then go back to macroing at home. It looked as though the Terran player wanted to do a 2-base push, but sort of realized, oh crap, I'm a little bit late. His mutas are going to be out, like when I'm out on the map. And at this time, we would often see pre-medevac timings versus Zerg were a big part of the meta. Now, because of the way that the economy works and you start with so many workers that are more efficient, you don't really see anything in the meta that has to do with pre-medevac timings. Almost all the builds include a medevac. So it's interesting in this time period, especially really talented Korean players like Bomber, MMA, MVP, they would do wild shit on you with these really stellar pre-medevac timings and crack your third. Whenever the Spire is halfway done, that's whenever Zerg wants to be making nothing but drones. Zerg doesn't want to ever make attacking units right before Spire finishes. Whenever Spire finishes, Zerg wants to have 1,000, and a bunch of free supply. And this is why. Because if you can gain an initial balloon of mutas that allows you to control the map and not have to make anything on the ground other than drones and queens, and just keep making muta and keep pressuring, it allows you to keep your opponent on the back foot. Then you have a huge flock of muta and can come in and snipe multiple turrets like we see. In IdrA, knowing that both of these corner bases are virtually indefensible, remember, no Lurker, no Ravager at this time, so the choke point is just brutal. IdrA has taken both bases, left and right, knowing that, yeah, Terran will probably kill one, but I'll have the other. Here he's intelligently making a few spines, has his mutas over, but this is what I mean. The Terran can just wander out like 3 feet from the freaking natural, but IdrA wants to engage here. He's going to attack upward into the Terran army and just do a bunch of damage, and intelligently he'll pull off with the money units, the gas units, the mutas, and the banes because he knew his lings had it. And notice IdrA has been diligently teching up at home, going into pathogen glands. He's not playing the sort of DRG layer-centric all-in style where he is just really focused on killing Gone. He's been absolutely dominating the whole game, but he's been diligently teching up into the late game. And a lot of times, whenever people consider IdrA's career, as we see him knifing in here and decimating the natural again and maintaining a virtually 100 supply lead, they'll oftentimes think of his flubs or games where he dominates after going into super late game, but to me, this is the IdrA that I think of, where he's playing against insane map imbalance. 4 Marines are at his front door in the early game before he can really see or do anything. He defends against it. This is sort of the untold truth of this era of games, is how absolutely volatile it was, and how easy it was to die as Zerg in this time on these maps, with the Queen being as bad as it was. Yeah, IdrA was great, and people can see that his Muta Harass was great this game. His Ling Bane screams forward here, and Fester Fungal goes down, and the Mutas flank beautifully, and Magic Box. Just exceptional control there from the Macro Machine to stomp out that attack on the center plateau of this map, and that was way harder to do than it looked. In this era, people were just fucking hotking everything on one key as Ling Bane screams forward and crushes the planetary. I mean, even now, to control Ling Bane, Muta, and Fester perfectly, where the Mutas are coming from an across-map flanking or harassment mission to now flank, and the Terrans pushing you to the dangerous part, and you nail your Fungal too, most people playing couldn't even do that now, and IdrA just nailed that on Jungle Basin. So that was a complete masterclass from IdrA Fields. The Gregathon marches on. Expect more frequent videos now that I'm healthy.